The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the darkness between stars. It was the size of a small moon, built just for meetings like this one. Today, it held the most important gathering the galaxy had seen in over 100 years. Captain Jake Morrison looked out through the small window of the human transport ship. The station grew larger as they got closer. Its metal surface was covered in lights and docking bays. Ships from dozens of different worlds were already attached to it like insects on a tree. "First time seeing something this big?" asked Commander Lisa Park. She sat across from Jake in the small passenger area. Her uniform was neat and clean, but Jake could see the weapons hidden under her jacket. Lisa never went anywhere without being ready for trouble. "No," Jake said quietly, but it never stopped being impressive. Ambassador Ryan Collins walked down the narrow hallway between the seats. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. Jake knew the ambassador had been working for months to get humans invited to this summit. It had not been easy. "Remember," Collins said to the small group of humans on the ship, "we are the newest species in the Galactic Confederation. Most of the others have been spacefaring for thousands of years. They see us as children playing with adult toys." Jake touched a small bronze metal pin to his uniform jacket. It was old and worn smooth in some places. The metal was not shiny like new metals. It looked like something that had been through hard times. "They will test us," Colin continued. "They will try to make us look weak or foolish. Stay calm. Stay professional. Do not give them any reason to kick us out of the Confederation." The transport ship shook slightly as it connected to the docking bay. Through the speakers, a voice spoke in the common galactic language. Jake understood most of it. The voice was telling them where to go and what rules to follow. The airlock opened with a loud hiss. The first thing that hit them was the smell. It was not bad, just different. It smelled like metal and ozone and something else Jake could not name. The air felt heavy and humid. They walked through long corridors filled with beings from across the galaxy. Jake saw tall, thin creatures with 4 arms and blue skin. There were short, furry beings that walked on 6 legs. Some creatures floated in the air without touching the ground. Most of them ignored the humans completely. A few looked at them with what might have been curiosity. Others looked at them with something that might have been contempt. The main conference hall was enormous. The ceiling was so high Jake could barely see it. Thousands of seats were arranged in circles around a central speaking area. Each section was marked with symbols Jake did not recognize. "There," Collins pointed to a small section near the back and bottom of the hall. "Our assigned seats." Jake noticed that all the important-looking sections were higher up and closer to the center. The human section was in what was clearly the least important area. It was like being put at the children's table during a family dinner. They made their way down to their seats. Jake counted 12 chairs in the human section. Only 8 humans had come to the summit. The empty chairs made their small group look even smaller. As they sat down, Jake became aware that they were being watched. He looked around and saw eyes from dozens of different species looking in their direction. Most looked away when he met their gaze, but some kept staring. In the highest section of the hall, something moved that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. It was huge, even sitting down. Its skin looked like dark green leather covered in scales. When it turned its massive head, Jake could see teeth like white daggers. "Esther," Lisa whispered next to him. "The warrior race. That big one has to be royalty. Look at the gold markings on her scales." Jake had heard stories about the SS Guitar. They were 7 feet tall on average, with claws that could cut through steel and jaws that could bite through bone. They had conquered more worlds than any other species in the galaxy. Their armies were feared everywhere. But what made them truly dangerous was not their strength. It was their intelligence. The SS Guitar were brilliant military strategists. They could plan battles that lasted for years and think 10 steps ahead of their enemies. The creature Lisa was watching was clearly female and clearly important. She wore no clothes except for pieces of metal armor that looked like they were made from precious metals. Jewels hung from chains around her thick neck. But it was her eyes that made Jake uncomfortable. They were large and yellow and seemed to miss nothing. "Queen Zaratho," Colin said quietly. "I was hoping she would not be here. Why? Jake asked. Because she hates humans. Her species thinks we are weak. They cannot understand how we got invited to join Confederation when we have never conquered anyone. More beings entered the hall. Jake saw creatures made of what looked like living crystal. Others appeared to be made of gas held together in clear containers. Some looked almost human except for extra arms or a different colored skin. The noise in the hall grew louder as more species arrived. Jake heard sounds that might have been talking, but in languages he could not understand. Some sounded like music. Others sounded like machines grinding together. A deep sound filled the hall. It was like a bell the size of a building. Everyone became quiet. Lights dimmed except for the ones focused on the central speaking area. A creature Jake had never seen before appeared in the center of the hall. It was tall and thin with skin that seemed to change color as it moved. When it spoke, its voice came from speakers all around the hall. Welcome, representatives of the Galactic Confederation, it said. We gather today to discuss the territorial disputes in the Outer Rim sectors. These conflicts have gone on too long. They must be resolved. Jake felt tension in the air. The Outer Rim was where new worlds were being discovered almost every day. Everyone wanted to claim them. Wars had started over less. We will hear from each species in order of their membership in Confederation, the creature continued. The hegemony will speak first, followed by the Vrex Commerce Guild, then the Tulcari Systems. The list went on and on. Humans were mentioned last. It was another reminder that they were the newest and least important members of the group. As the first speaker began to talk, Jake noticed that Queen Zarthol was still watching the human section. Her yellow eyes seemed to be focused on him specifically. He looked down at his uniform, wondering if something was wrong with it. Everything seemed in order. His jacket was clean and properly buttoned. His shoes were polished. The only thing that stood out was his bronze medal. Jake looked back up and saw that the queen was indeed staring at his medal. Her huge head was tilted slightly to one side, like a predator studying its prey. He had a bad feeling that this was going to be a very long day. 3 hours had passed since the summit began. Jake Morrison had listened to 12 different species talk about their claims to worlds in the Outer Rim. Each speaker tried to sound more important than the last one. Each claimed their species deserved more territory. Jake's back was starting to hurt from the uncomfortable chair. The human section had been given the cheapest seats in the hall. They were made of hard metal with thin cushions that did nothing to help. Commander Lisa Park sat next to him, alert and watching everything. Ambassador Collins was taking notes on his electronic pad. The other humans in their group looked tired and bored, but Jake could still feel eyes on him. Every few minutes, he would look up toward the high section where the SS Gatar delegation sat. Queen Zarthol was always watching. Her yellow eyes never seemed to look anywhere else. During a break between speakers, Jake heard heavy footsteps on the metal floor. The sound was different from the light steps of most species. These steps were slow, deliberate, and powerful. The footsteps stopped. Jake looked up and felt his heart jump into his throat. Queen Zarthol stood directly in front of the human section. Up close, she was even more frightening than from a distance. She was nearly 8 feet tall. Her scales were dark green with gold patterns that marked her as royalty. Her claws were as long as Jake's fingers and looked razor sharp. But it was her presence that was most intimidating. She radiated power and confidence. This was a being who had never been afraid of anything in her life. This was a creature who had conquered worlds and commanded armies. Human, she said. Her voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. The word came out like an insult. Jake stood up slowly. Even standing, the top of his head only reached her chest. Around the hall, conversation stopped. Everyone was watching now. Your Majesty, Jake said, trying and keep his voice steady. Queen Zarthol pointed one massive clawed finger at his chest. That trinket you wear, what is it supposed to represent? Jake looked down at his bronze medal. It suddenly felt very heavy pinned to his uniform. It is a military decoration, Your Majesty. The Queen's membrane, a thin flap of skin over her eyes, flicked. Jake had read that this was a sign of amusement among her species. Military decoration? She said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. From what military? What possible conflict could your weak species have been involved in that would deserve recognition? Around the hall, Jake heard sound that might have been laughter. The crystal beings made a sound like wind chimes. The gas creatures made a sound like steam escaping. Other species made clicks, growls, and whistles that sounded mocking. Ambassador Collins started to stand up. Your Majesty, perhaps we could discuss this at a more appropriate time dash. No, Queen Zarathos said without looking away from Jake. I want to hear this now. I want to know what the newest, weakest species in Confederation thinks qualifies as military service. Jake felt heat rise in his face. Around him, he could sense Lisa and the other humans tensing up. This was exactly what Ambassador Collins had warned them about. They were being tested, and they were failing. But something about the Queen's tone made Jake angry. It was not just dismissive. It was cruel. She was not asking because she wanted to know. She was asking because she wanted to humiliate him in front of the entire galaxy. Jake raised his hand slightly, stopping Ambassador Collins from speaking. For the first time since the Queen had approached, Jake looked directly into her yellow eyes. This medal represents the Battle of Kepler 442b, Your Majesty. The Queen's membrane flicked again. But this time, Jake thought he saw something different in her expression. Was it surprise? Kepler 442b, she said. I know that world. Of course she knew it, Jake thought. Her species had conquered it. My forces took that rock in 3 standard hours, the Queen continued. Her voice carried clearly through the silent hall. It was barely inhabited. A nothing world on the edge of nowhere. What could humans have possibly done there that would be worthy of recognition? Jake felt his mouth go dry. This was it. This was the moment Ambassador Collins had been afraid of. One wrong word, and the human delegation would be thrown out of Confederation. But Jake also knew he could not lie. Not about this. Not about what had happened on Kepler 442b. We held the evacuation zones for 72 hours, Your Majesty. Jake said. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the silent hall. Against your forces. The reaction was immediate. Around the hall, creatures began making sounds of surprise. The crystal beings chimed like broken glass. The gas creatures hissed. The fur-covered species barked and growled. Queen Zarathos' eyes narrowed to thin slits. Impossible. My report said there was no significant resistance. There was resistance, Your Majesty. Jake said, just not the kind your people expected. Commander Lisa's hand moved toward her weapon. Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. Around the hall, other species were becoming agitated. Some were standing up in their seats. Others were making sounds that clearly meant they wanted to see a fight. Queen Zarathos stepped closer to Jake. She was so close now that he could smell her breath. It smelled like metal and something dead. Explain yourself human, she said. Her voice was deadly quiet now. Explain how 47 humans could hold back my armies for 3 days. Jake blinked. How did you know there were 47 of us? The Queen's membrane flicked again. For just a moment, she looked uncomfortable. My commanders mentioned it in their reports. Jake nodded slowly. Then you know we were not there to win, Your Majesty. We were there to buy time. Time for what? Jake touched his medal again. The metal was warm from his body heat. For the evacuation ships to reach safe jump distance. What evacuation ships? The Queen demanded. Jake looked around the hall. Every species was watching. Every creature was listening. This was his moment to speak for humanity. This was his chance to show the galaxy who humans really were. The ships carrying 1.2 million refugees, Your Majesty, Jake said. Civilians from 7 different species who were trapped on Kepler 442b when your invasion began. The hall became completely silent. Not a sound could be heard except for the hum of the air recycling systems. Queen Zarathos stared at Jake for a long moment. Refugees? Yes, Your Majesty. They needed 72 hours minimum to reach safe jump distance from your fleet. We had 47 humans planetside, colonial marines and volunteers. Jake paused. This medal represents the 31 who did not make it to the last transport. The Queen's eyes widened slightly. Around the hall, Jake could see other species leaning forward in their seats. "You stay to protect refugees?" the Queen asked. "Civilians who are not even your own species?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Why?" Jake looked at her in surprise. "Because they needed protecting." The simple answer seemed to hit Queen Zarathol like a physical blow. She stepped backward, her massive form suddenly looking less intimidating. "You fought my armies for refugees?" "We fought your armies for time, Your Majesty. Time for innocent people to escape." The Queen looked around the hall, as if seeing it for the first time. When she looked back at Jake, her expression had changed completely. "Tell me about this battle," she said. But her voice was different now. The mockery was gone. In its place was something that sounded almost like respect. Jake took a deep breath. The real story was just beginning. Jake Morrison looked around the enormous hall. Every creature was watching him. Every species that had ever conquered worlds, that had built empires across the stars, was waiting to hear his story. Queen Zarathol stood in front of him, no longer looking like a predator about to strike. Her yellow eyes showed something Jake had not expected to see: curiosity. "Tell me about Kepler 442b, she said. Jake touched his bronze medal one more time. The memories came flooding back. He could almost smell the smoke and dust of that distant world. Kepler 442b was a refugee world, Jake began. His voice carried clearly through the silent hall. When the Outer Rim conflict started, civilians from all over the sector fled there. It was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be neutral territory. He paused, remembering. But then your advanced scouts found it. Queen Zarthol's membrane flicked. My forces were expanding into unclaimed territory. We had no knowledge of refugee settlements. "I know," Jake said. "Your scouts reported it as a lightly defended mining world," which was technically correct. There were only 47 humans on the entire planet. We were part of a Colonial Marine detachment sent to help with security. Jake looked at Commander Lisa Park. She nodded at him. She had been there too, though she had been evacuated with the first wave of ships. "When your fleet appeared in the system, we had maybe 6 hours before your invasion force landed," Jake continued. "The refugee camps held 1.2 million beings. Men, women, children, elderly, sick, everyone who had run from the wars." Around the hall, creatures began to shift in their seats. Jake could see some of the predator species, looking uncomfortable. "The evacuation ships could only hold about 50,000 people each," Jake said. "And we only had 24 ships. Even if we packed them beyond safe capacity, we needed at least 4 trips to get everyone out." "4 trips?" Queen Zarthol asked. "That would take 72 hours minimum," Jake finished. "Your invasion force would land in 6 hours." The math was simple and horrible. Jake could see understanding dawn in the Queen's eyes. "So you stayed?" she said quietly. "We stayed." Jake began walking slowly around the human section as he talked. It helped him remember. It helped him find the words. "We had 47 Marines and about 200 volunteers from the refugee camps against your invasion force of 10,000 soldiers." He heard sounds of disbelief from around the hall. Some species made clicking noises. Others whistled or growled. "We could not win," Jake said simply. "We all knew that. Your soldiers were better trained, better equipped, and there were more of them. But we did not need to win. We just needed to slow you down." Queen Zarthol was listening intently now. "How?" "We used everything we could find," Jake said. "The refugees had been mining the planet for rare metals. We took their industrial explosives and turned them into weapons. We used their heavy machinery to build barriers and traps." Jake remembered the desperate hours before the invasion, humans and aliens working together, turning peaceful mining equipment into instruments of war. "We divided into small teams," he continued. "Each team took a different section of the main valley where the refugee camps were located. Our job was to make your advance as slow and difficult as possible. Guerrilla tactics," the Queen said with something that sounded like approval. "Yes, we hit your forces and then ran. We used the mining tunnels to move around underground. We set traps with the explosives. We used the mining lasers as weapons. Jake paused, remembering the sound of the first SS Qatar dropships landing. Your soldiers expected to march through and secure the area in a few hours. Instead, they had to fight for every meter, every building, every tunnel. Queen Zarthol's eyes were fixed on Jake's face. My report said the resistance was unexpectedly fierce. We made every meter cost you time, Jake said. Not because we thought we could stop you, but because those evacuation ships needed every minute we could give them. Jake could see the first evacuation ship in his memory. It had been overloaded with refugees, mostly the young and the elderly. He remembered watching it struggle to lift off, engines straining under the weight. The first ship left 6 hours after your invasion began, Jake said. It carried mostly Rex traders and their families. 60,000 beings packed into a ship designed for 50,000. He looked around the hall and saw several wrecks in the crystal being section. They were absolutely still, their crystalline forms reflecting the lights in complex patterns. The second ship left 18 hours later, Jake continued. By then, your forces had taken the outer camps. We had pulled back to the inner defensive ring. Jake remembered that day. The SS Qatar soldiers had been angry and frustrated. What should have been a quick conquest was turning into a grinding urban battle. We lost 8 people taking out your first armored unit, Jake said quietly. They used themselves as living bombs, getting close enough to your vehicles to plant explosives. Around the hall, predator species made sound a surprise. Even among warrior races, such sacrifice was rare. The third ship left 36 hours after the invasion started. Jake said, we were down to the inner camps by then. Your forces had us surrounded, but they still could not break through quickly. Queen Zarthol was staring at him intently. What changed? Jake smiled sadly. You brought in the heavy weapons. Artillery, plasma cannons. You decided to level the entire area. Standard siege tactics, the Queen said. Yes, and it worked. We could not defend against that level of firepower. But by then, the fourth evacuation ship was already loading. Jake remembered the sound of the plasma cannons. The ground had shaken with each impact. Buildings had collapsed into rubble. The air had been full of smoke and dust and the smell of burned metal. We held the landing pads for as long as we could, Jake said. The last 16 humans formed a defensive circle around the final evacuation ship while it loaded the remaining refugees. His voice became quieter. I was ordered onto that ship. My commanding officer said someone needed to survive to tell the story. Jake looked at his hands. They were shaking. Slightly. I watched from the ship's window as the landing pad was overrun. 15 humans against 200 of your soldiers. They knew they were going to die, but they held the line until the ship was far enough away to be safe. The hull was completely silent now. Even the air recycling system seemed quieter. The ship made it to safe jump distance 71 hours and 43 minutes after your invasion began, Jake said. All 1.2 million refugees escaped. Queen Zarthol stared at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet. 31 humans died. Yes. To save 1.2 million beings they had never met. Yes. From dozens of different species. Yes. The Queen looked around the hall, then back at Jake, including SS Qatar. Jake felt his heart stop. He had not known that. In all the chaos and confusion of the evacuation, he had never seen the full manifest. Your Majesty? Queen Zarthol's voice was barely above a whisper. There were SS Qatar refugees on those ships, civilians from the border colonies who had fled the fighting. Jake stared at her. We did not know. You saved my people, the Queen said. You died saving my people. SS Qatar children and their families. The enormity of it hit Jake, like a physical blow. They had fought SS Qatar soldiers to save SS Qatar civilians. They had died protecting the families of the very warriors who killed them. How many? Jake asked. Queen Zarthol's membrane closed completely over her eyes. 200,000. The number hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. 200,000, Sissitar, Jake repeated. Including, the Queen said, her voice breaking slightly, my younger sister and her newborn hatchlings. The silence in the hall was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. The silence in the great hall stretched on and on. Jake Morrison could hear nothing except his own breathing and the quiet hum of the air systems. Every creature in the enormous room was completely still. Queen Zarathul stood like a statue in front of him. Her massive form had not moved since she revealed that humans had died protecting her sister. Her yellow eyes were closed behind their protective membranes. Jake did not know what to say. He had told his story. He had explained what the bronze medal meant, but he had never expected this. Your sister? He finally whispered. The Queen's membranes opened slowly. When she looked at Jake again, her eyes were different. The predator was still there, but something else had joined it. Something that looked almost like pain. Princess Cathera, the Queen said quietly. She was pregnant when the border wars started. She fled with her mate and their unborn clutch to what was supposed to be a safe world. Jake felt his chest tighten. Kepler 442b. Yes, she gave birth there, in one of your refugee camps. 3 hatchlings, my first nephews and niece. Around the hall, other creatures began to stir. Jake could see members of different species whispering to each other. The crystal beings were making soft chiming sounds. The gas creatures were shifting in their containers. Queen Zarathul reached into a pouch on her armor and pulled out a small device. She touched it with one clawed finger, and a hologram appeared in the air above them. The image showed a SSKTAR female, smaller than the Queen but clearly related to her. She was holding 3 tiny creatures that looked like miniature versions of adult SSKTAR. The babies were no bigger than Jake's hand. This was sent to me after the evacuation, the Queen said. Cathera wanted to thank the humans who had protected her family. She wanted me to know that there were good people in the galaxy. Jake stared at the image. The baby SSKTAR looked so small and helpless. It was hard to imagine they would grow up to be 8-foot-tall warriors. I never understood what she meant, the Queen continued. My people value strength above all else. We respect those who conquer, who take what they want by force. I could not understand why anyone would die for strangers. She looked directly at Jake. Now I do. Queen Zarathul began to move, but instead of standing taller, she began to lower herself. Jake watched in amazement as the most feared warrior in the galaxy slowly knelt in front of him. Around the hall, creatures began making sounds of shock. Some stood up in their seats. Others made clicking, whistling, or humming noises that clearly meant they could not believe what they were seeing. The Queen placed both of her massive hands on the ground and lowered her head until her forehead nearly touched the floor. It was a position of complete submission and respect. In the name of Princess Cathera and her hatchlings, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. In the name of the 200,000 Etar who live because of human sacrifice, I offer the blood debt of the royal house. Jake had read about SSKTAR customs. A blood debt was the highest honor one SSKTAR could offer another. It meant that the Queen's entire family owed their lives to Jake and his people. Your Majesty, Jake said, please stand up. You do not owe us anything. The Queen raised her head but remained kneeling. We owe you everything. My sister lives because 31 humans chose to die. My nephews and niece will grow up because your people held the line. She stood slowly, her full height towering over Jake once again. But now her posture was different. She stood like a warrior offering respect to another warrior. You did not know there were SSKTAR among the refugees, she said. No, you did not know that saving them would earn you our gratitude. No, you saved them because they needed saving. Yes. Queen Zarathul turned to face the entire hall. Her voice became loud and commanding, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. Let every species here understand what we have learned today, she announced. Humans do not fight for conquest. They do not fight for territory or resources or glory. They fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. She pointed at Jake's medal. That small piece of metal represents something none of our great empires have ever achieved. It represents perfect sacrifice for perfect strangers. Around the hall, creatures began to react. Some were nodding their heads or making agreeing sounds. Others looked confused or uncomfortable. The Queen continued, "We have all built our civilizations on strength. We have conquered worlds and enslaved the weak. We have taken what we wanted because we had the power to take it." Her voice grew louder. "But humans have shown us a different kind of strength. The strength to die for others. The strength to protect the helpless even when there is no reward." Jake felt embarrassed by the attention. "Your Majesty, we just did what anyone would do." "No," the Queen said firmly. "You did what humans do, and that makes all the difference." She turned back to face the hall. "The territorial disputes we came here to discuss seem very small now. We argue over who gets to control empty worlds, while humans show us what it means to be truly civilized." A creature from the hegemony section stood up. It was tall and thin with blue skin and 4 arms. "Queen Zarthol, surely you do not suggest that conquest and expansion are wrong?" The Queen's eyes narrowed as she looked at the speaker. "I suggest that conquest without purpose is meaningless. What is the point of controlling 100 worlds if we cannot protect even one?" Another creature spoke up, this one from species Jake did not recognize. "But humans are weak. They have no great fleets, no mighty armies. They held back my armies for 3 days," the Queen replied coldly, "with 47 soldiers and mining equipment. If that is weakness, I would hate to see their strength." Jake felt he should say something. "Your Majesty, we are not warriors like your people. We do not seek conflict." "No," the Queen agreed. "You seek to protect. That is why the galaxy needs you." She turned to address the entire hall again. "I propose a change to these proceedings. Instead of arguing over who gets to claim new territories, perhaps we should ask the humans how to protect them." The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some creatures made sounds of agreement. Others made sounds that were clearly protests. Jake could see heated discussions breaking out in several sections of the hall. The tall, thin creature who had led the summit appeared in the center of the speaking area. Its skin was flashing different colors rapidly, a sign that it was stressed or excited. "This is highly irregular," it announced. "The territorial negotiations have been planned for months." Queen Zarthol looked down at the creature with something that might have been amusement. "Many things are irregular today. Perhaps it is time for some irregularity." She looked back at Jake. "Tell me, Captain Morrison, if your people were given responsibility for protecting the Outer Rim territories, what would you do?" Jake felt panic rise in his chest. This was not what he had expected when he woke up that morning. "Your Majesty, I am not qualified to make policy decisions for Dash." "You are qualified to understand what protection means," the Queen interrupted. "That makes you more qualified than most of the beings in this room." Jake looked around at the thousands of creatures watching him. He thought about his training, about the oaths he had taken as a Marine, about the 31 friends who had died on Kepler 442b. "We would make sure no one had to run," he said finally. "We would make sure families could stay together. We would make sure children were safe." The Queen nodded approvingly. "And if someone threatened those families, we would stop them, even if they were stronger than you." Jake touched his metal one last time. "Especially then." Queen Zarthol spread her arms wide, addressing the entire hall. "There is your answer. This is why humans deserve not just membership in the Confederation, but leadership in it." The sound from around the hall grew louder. Jake could see some species gesturing in what looked like heated argument. Others seemed to be agreeing with the Queen. "I propose," the Queen announced, "that we restructure these negotiations entirely. Instead of competing for a territory, let us work together to protect it, and let us ask the humans to show us how." The tall, thin creature in the center looked overwhelmed. "This would require a complete revision of the summit agenda." "Then we revise it," the Queen said simply. "Some things are more important than agendas." Jake felt Commander Lisa Park's hand on his shoulder. She leaned close and whispered, "I think you just changed the galaxy." Jake looked around at the enormous hall full of beings from across the stars. He thought about his friends who had died on a distant world, fighting to protect people they had never met. He wondered if they would believe that their sacrifice would lead to this moment. "I hope so," he whispered back. Queen Zarathel approached him one more time, but now she moved differently, like she was approaching an equal rather than a curiosity. "Captain Morrison," she said formally, "would you be willing to work with us? To help us learn what it means to truly protect rather than simply conquer?" Jake looked at Ambassador Collins, who nodded with something that looked like pride and amazement. "Yes, Your Majesty," Jake said, "we would be honored to help." The Queen smiled, showing her dangerous teeth. But for the first time, the smile looked friendly rather than threatening. "Then let us begin," she said. "Let us learn what it means to be human." Around the hall, the sounds of argument were gradually being replaced by sounds of discussion and planning. Jake realized that his simple bronze medal had done something no weapon or threat ever could have done. It had shown the galaxy that there was a better way to be strong.